Hello and welcome to Church360 Ledger, how to accurately track your church budget with Church360 Ledger. My name is Peter Frank. I am the digital product owner here at Concordia Technology Solutions. More about CTS in just a moment. My email address is on the screen, and I always love to hear from customers who have questions, but I do want to mention something. I am now in a part-time capacity here at CTS. I've worked with the organization for 15 years, and I am slowly transitioning away from this role as I begin to enter into full-time church ministry. I am a seminary student, a second career guy, and I am going to be going out on vicarage in just a few months. So feel free to reach out to me. Just know that I am working about 8 hours a week now while I study the rest of the week. So I'll show some information later about how you can reach out to our support team if you have any questions. So if you don't hear from me, please don't feel bad. We've got other people that can help you. But I love doing webinars, and that's why I'm here today. So a little bit about Concordia Technology Solutions. We are the church administration division of Concordia Publishing House, and we've been developing software since 1984. That is actually before I was born, just barely, but before I was born. It's been always so fascinating to me just to remember what technology was like when I was 10 or 12 in the late 90s, and to think that much earlier what church software is like that. But we've been doing it since that time. Now, in the course of our history here at Concordia Publishing House, that's just a small fraction of it, because we've been publishing resources and distributing resources for our church, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, since 1869. You can see a group of our employees there at the 150th anniversary celebration, which is going on almost 3 years ago now. So yeah, 152 years, going on 153 years in business. We are here to serve the church by whatever that means in the given time and time of our nation, time of our church body. So right now, that definitely means digital products, software solutions like Church360 Ledger. So if you are not familiar with it, I'm pretty sure you are since you're here, but just real quick, Church360 Ledger is a web-based finance software designed exclusively for churches. It streamlines the accounting process, so balancing budgets and managing accounts is simple and intuitive, meaning you are a church, you have to operate in many ways like a business, but you're not a business, and you don't need all of the tools that many of the other fancy finance softwares offer. Now, there's some great products out there that do wonderful things, but they're usually too complex for the church, or at least for the smaller churches. And that's where Church360 Ledger comes in. We have designed it to be a simple church accounting software. I'll talk more about that in just a minute, but some housekeeping items before we begin. We've got this whole webinar scheduled for an hour. I'm planning to present most of that time. I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the very end for some question and answers. Typically, we don't have a lot of time for questions because there's so much I can show you. And the other thing is, with Church360 Ledger, most of the questions I get are very specific and kind of tied to your individual situation. I can't always answer those on webinars, but that doesn't mean I don't want to hear your questions. So feel free to ask anything throughout the webinar. I should note, attendees are muted. So when you ask a question, it's going to go into the chat. And it's always good to kind of test that out. So what I'd like to do right now is for you to find that question spot and go ahead and type in where you're watching this webinar from today. You can type in your city and your state. If you want to put your church name, go for it. I want to make sure that you know where the question feature is so that you can ask those questions later on. So go ahead and type in your city and your state. Looks like we got Jan from Topeka. Oh, we've got Bill from Minneapolis, Carrie from New Boston, that's in Michigan, Rodney from Richland Center in Wisconsin. Wonderful. Thank you all for being here today. We've got more coming in. We've got Ken from Westminster, Maryland. Wonderful. Thank you guys for being here today. It's always great to see where everybody's listening in and watching from, especially because right now we're pretty cold in St. Louis. And I like to see some of those northern states to see, you probably are a little bit colder where you're watching it. Unless you're Frank from Anaheim. Anaheim, I'm sure, is beautiful this time of year because Anaheim is always beautiful. All right, one other thing. We often get questions about the recording. The recording will be shared. One of the members of my team has already assured me that she's going to work and get the email sent out for me. It may look like it's coming from me, but we are a team here at CTS. So you'll be getting an email with the link to the recording sometime in the next couple days. Now, a few assumptions about who you are. I always like to assume things so that I can prepare the materials. And I like to share these assumptions so if it doesn't quite match, you know why. I'm assuming you are not currently using Church360 Ledger. This is an introductory webinar. We're not going to get too far in the weeds. Some of these things will be very specific details, but I don't want to expect you know what you're doing. I expect this is the first time you've seen it, and if it's not, then you got a leg up, and you'll still learn some things. I'm also assuming you are not an accountant. Church360 Ledger was designed for volunteers who are willing to do church finances, but don't have that professional background. Now, if you are, great. I'm sure you'll pick things up very quickly. You'll probably have questions that may be too hard for me to answer. Hopefully not. That doesn't usually happen, but sometimes. I'm not an accountant, so if you get too far into the lingo, then I might be a little bit lost. But I've been working with church finances for about a decade now, so I'm pretty familiar with the subject matter. I'm also assuming you are limited by time, funds, or both. And so I want to respect your time today because, as we say in business, time is money. But that also applies to why you're looking at Church360 Ledger. You're wanting to manage your funds, your church finances, without spending too much time or money on it because you're a good steward for the church. So that's what I'm assuming about you. Now, going back to that first point, if you are not using Church360 Ledger right now, you are certainly welcome to start a free trial at 360ledger.com. Now, you see it's a free 37-day trial. That way you can start for a whole month and have a week to do reconciliation. So we're on January 27th. That's usually a really good time to start a trial because you'd be able to get all the way through February with a few days in March to do the reconciliation. So if you want to try that, I recommend you do it. All right, let me ask you a little bit about yourself just as we're getting started. All right, first, what is your primary role at church? I'm going to put this up on the screen and you can vote on this or kind of select one, and it's going to tally it up and I'll share the results with you in just a moment. So are you the church financial manager? Are you a church administrator? Maybe you're a pastor who has to get involved in finances. Maybe you're just the tech coordinator and you're the one that checks out software before your church starts to use it. Well, it's looking like, as I expected, the vast majority are the church financial manager. That's why I put it at the top of the list. That's usually how it goes. So I'll close that poll and share it with you. Sorry if you didn't quite get a chance to vote or not. We have a few leftovers, but you've got 78% of you are in that church financial manager role, as I expected. Good. The next one, just to confirm my suspicion that you are new to the software, are you currently using Church360 Ledger? Yes, we've been using it a while. Yes, but we just signed up. No, but we're planning on it pretty soon. Or no, this is the first time I've heard about it. I got an email from someone and they said to sign up. Which one of these are you? All right, well, let's see. We've got a number of people still voting. I get the percentage and it's slowing down, and usually when it slows down or stops for a few seconds, then I stop it. All right, very good. Well, this is sort of close to what I was expected, probably a few more in that top category than we normally have at these webinars. So 33% have been using it for a while, and the rest are not, but are considering it. So very good. One of the things that I always try to do is make this not a sales pitch. So even though a lot of you don't have this, and I am planning on answering questions about pricing and showing all that, I just want to show you the software. Remember, I'm a seminarian. This is not my long-term career. I don't get commission or anything on any of this. I just like to help churches out. Sometimes that means selling church finance software, and sometimes that means going to seminary and learning how to preach. All right, the last one. What's your church size? What was your average weekly attendance before COVID? COVID has changed a lot of things, but churches usually act a certain way depending on their attendance. And COVID, while it has changed attendance numbers, churches are still functioning kind of like they were, at least in terms of church size, prior to COVID. So, a church that used to have 400 weekly attendance and now has 150 still kind of operates like a church with 400 unless they've had to downsize their staff or change their governance or something like that. All right, very good. We've got almost everybody voted. I'm going to go ahead and close this and share it. So the majority are in that 51 to 199. So not quite the smallest of churches, although that's second place, but certainly not large churches. You 190 or so weekly attendance is certainly a fair-sized church, but it operates very differently than a 400 plus weekly attendance. Good. Thank you so much for participating in that. I'm going to have one other question that's more tied to the presentation in just a few moments, and I'm just going to have you put that into the chat. All right, a little bit about what we're talking about. Church360 is our suite of products. That means that brand Church360 kind of acts as an umbrella for products like Church360 Ledger, or like Church360 Members, our people management software where you track attendance and offerings. You might say, well, why offerings? That's finance. Well, offerings is really, certainly it's money coming in, but it's really more about the people. Offerings from Church360 members will flow in to Ledger to make deposits, but whereas offerings are multiple transactions because each person is giving, Ledger cares about your chart of accounts. It cares about your bank deposits. And usually offerings are done as single bank deposits. Sometimes it's split up a little bit, but it's not a deposit for every gift. And so that's where that dividing line comes into play. Now we also have Church360 Unite, which is our church website builder. That doesn't have many direct ties to Ledger, but it's all part of the Church360 suite. So Church360 Ledger, church finance software, I already mentioned that, but I do want to tell you that our focus has been on making it intuitive, secure, focused on ministry. And that kind of leads to the next slide. What are our goals of Church360 Ledger? I'm going to go through these rather quickly, and you'll hear me mention a few things related to them later on. But as we went about developing Church360 Ledger, we wanted to make finances simple enough for volunteers, but detailed enough for professionals, meaning we want to do it right, but we also want to make it easy. And that is a very fine line to tread. We wanted to prevent the ill-intentioned from doing wrong. We don't want to make it easy for people to embezzle funds. I just took a pastoral leadership class, and we were talking about situations to avoid, why you need absolute transparency with your church finances and have layers of accountability. And many of my classmates who are just out of undergraduate, they were shocked that so many churches have had to deal with embezzlement. Now, what we know is that if somebody steals money from or wants to steal money from a church, they're going to do it. You can't necessarily stop them, but you can usually catch them after the fact or during it if you have good systems and good software in place that help you track exactly who's doing what. We also want to prevent the well-intentioned from making mistakes. And that's usually what happens more than the other one, because you'll have volunteers who are helping who don't really know what they're doing, but they're willing to spend their time on it. And so we try to make it as simple as possible. Now, can you make mistakes? Absolutely. We can't prevent typos, but we can do our best to make sure that things are entered as they're supposed to be. And lastly, we wanted to make sure you had access where and how you need it. So if you need to access it from your home, you can access it from your home. If you need to only access certain accounts, like maybe you're my example I always use is the youth minister who really wants to know what kind of budget they have left, doesn't need to know anything else. You can do that. You can give them access just to that information. So by the end of today, I'm going to show you how to set up your chart of accounts. I'm going to help you set budgets and enter those transactions. And I probably should have put a little extra on, see where you're at compared to budget. So that's it. We're going to talk about cash basis accounting, books and fiscal years, chart of accounts, restricted funds, which I think is what really sets Church360 Ledger apart from other finance software, at least in terms of how we set it up. Budgets, and then Q&A at the very end. So just a few slides. If you are an accountant, I apologize in advance because you're going to say, what? This is way too simple of an explanation. Well, yes, this is not the webinar to train you on accounting, but cash basis accounting is what Ledger is based on. And what that means is that Revenue or income is recognized as soon as it was received, meaning as soon as it's deposited. That is when it is put into your financial system. So even if you got all your offerings in January, but you didn't make the deposit until February, well, they're there in February. That's what's tracked to. Now, you can do some finagling with backdating. We don't typically recommend that, but there's some legitimate circumstances. But it's not like saying that, well, this third party, this rental income was for over this period of time, so let's accrue it or anything like that. And I think that happens even more so with expenses. Salaries are tracked when you pay the paycheck, not necessarily for the period of the services rendered. So I hope that makes sense, because a lot of times the questions are making assumptions and they're not necessarily true. Those are the assumptions we're working with. Now I'm going to pull up this types of accounts. We're going to talk about assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. Those are the type of accounts that we work with, and that's pretty straightforward for most financial people. But if you don't understand the differences between them, what I'm going to share is going to be a little bit confusing. I probably should have only had asset up there, but an asset account is money that you actually have. So this would be like your savings account, your checking account. Kind of sounds like personal finances. That's not too far off. Assets can be split into restricted funds, meaning you've set this money aside. Think of it like the traditional envelope system, where not church offering envelopes, but personal savings envelopes, where you say, okay, here's all my money, but this amount is being set aside for this. This amount is being set aside for this, like that. That's what our assets and restricted funds do for you, is it tells you what money is actually there and how it's supposed to be used. Liabilities are dollars that you owe someone else. So it might be your church's credit card bill. It might be your church's mortgage. It's expenses that it reflects the expenses that have occurred that have not actually been paid for. Income is money coming in. Your offerings, your special gifts, anything where money is being added to your account. Now, I know for many churches, they're getting many different sources of income, just because that's the way today's world works. You have to be creative in how you fund the ministry. So we'll show how you can add multiple accounts. It's not just all, well, here's our offering fund, that's all we need. And finally, expenses. Everybody gets expenses. When you spend money, you feel it. That's an expense. So those are the four types of accounts. And we follow what's called T-chart accounting, very basic credits and debits. And I'll refer back to this at some point later on as we're looking at the transactions. But let's go ahead and log into the software. Now that I've talked for a long time, really that's about laying the groundwork so that what I show you makes more sense. I should point out, on our website, you go here and start that free trial. That's what I did. I logged in. I went through the first screen, which asks me to name my book. And your book is essentially your chart of accounts and all the transactions that go with that. So if you look over here, this is the navigation. Up at the top, right by that ledger logo, you've got the name of your book. And right now I only have one book. You've got some tools up in the top right, your print queue, your reports, your settings, your user. Then you have your navigation, which you can't do anything with right now because we don't have any accounts yet. You have your transaction button. And then this is the typical account view, where it'll show anything underneath it in the tree, and then any line items. Now, as you can see here, I have zero data. I started fresh. I started this trial account just a little while ago for this webinar because I want to kind of build up to it. And we're not going to have a lot of data by the time we're done, but you will know where every piece of data came from because we're doing it live. All right, so here, before I get too far, I want you to start thinking about, we're going to use an example, and I don't know what that example is, but please suggest a specific kind of ministry. There's two things I want you to do. The first one's a kind of ministry, because we're going to budget out income for it, we're going to budget out expenses. So think of a ministry at your church, or just any church, that has some particular stories attached to it. You don't have to tell the whole stories. If it's clear, I can make that up as we go. And then I'd also like you to think of a way that your church might earn income outside of the offering plate. And we'll factor that in here too. So I've never done this before. I thought about it as I was preparing for this webinar, like, yeah, I don't have to come up with the examples. I can ask you guys some examples. You might think about what's going on at your church. So go ahead and put that in, and if I don't get any ideas, I'll make something up once we get to that point. All right, so I mentioned I set up the book. If you click on the settings, the first half of these above the line are specific things that are tied to your book. So chart of accounts, budgets, fiscal years, recurring transactions, and imported transactions. The ones below that refer to your actual account, which means that you can have more than one book, but all of these things here apply to both. So like your roles or your payees, that's shared data across books. Now, let's talk about books. What is a book in terms of Church360 Ledger? Well, here we have it. You can see Christ Community Church. This is a fictional church. If you had a school attached to that, or a different ministry that kind of operates on a different set of books, or does its own thing, it's still part of your church, but it operates separately. I know many schools do. You can do that where you say Christ Community School, and then you might have a different fiscal year. That happened at my church and school for a while. They finally aligned them, I don't know, like 10 years ago. Before I got involved, so maybe 12 years ago, but I can't imagine having different starting dates. But that's what we're going to do here. So Christ Community Church has a fiscal year that aligns with the calendar year, where Christ Community School has a fiscal year that starts around the school year. And then you can say the beginning activity. So we're just going to leave it at January 1, but that's different than your beginning fiscal year. All right, we'll click submit. Now we have two books. I'm not going to do too much with the school, but I did want to show you that when you click up here, this is how you navigate between two different books. All right, I've got the suggestion of a food pantry and grant income. That sounds wonderful. Ken, thank you very much for suggesting that. That'll work out well. Food pantry with grant income. All right, because the next thing we're going to do here, actually, let's go ahead and add a new book. We'll just call this food pantry. And we'll keep it on a calendar fiscal year starting this month. There you go. All right, so now we'll switch it to food pantry. There we go. All right, when we go and click the drop down, it still looks the same, but now when I go to chart of accounts, this is all related to the food pantry. So let's remember, assets are all about money that you have. We don't have any money yet, but we have a pretty good idea that we're going to have money. So you can do, well, first off, let me show you, toggle between these types of accounts. And so it only displays one type at a time, and you can add new categories and new accounts. A category is basically just a folder. And so maybe you have, you divide it by your bank, USA Bank. And then you say a new account. This is our checking account. And you could put in an account number if you wanted. You should have an initial balance. So we'll type in, that's a lot of money. The checking account, we'll do 56,000. Oops. All right, and we can write checks from that. Submit. And then we'll move that, drag it under. So you can see as you pull it over to the right, now it starts to form that tree. And we'll do another new account we'll call savings. And we could put a number in, but we don't have to. And we can't write checks from that account. And so we'll do a little bit more here. I mean, this is quite a bit of money for a food pantry, but you have to operate for the future. So do that. And we'll move that up. Savings, checking. So you see how I can drag and drop it. As I pull it under the account, you have the balance there. Now, this looks pretty simple and straightforward. Yeah, you just type in the beginning balance, you're good to go. Now, and a trained accountant will tell you that the beginning balances are one way that you can easily manipulate and embezzle funds, in that you can make your accounts match with the statements, but it's because you changed things in the past. You can't do that with Church360 Ledger. We can do that right now because we're setting up the chart of accounts right now. And so you can type in any number, but once you start balancing the books, meaning reconciling transactions, you can't touch these beginning balances without providing some justification for it. Like, where did this money come from? So that's why it looks so easy right now, but just be aware that at some point, you're not going to be able to do that. So when you're setting up your chart of accounts, you're going with balances from a specific point in time so that it always aligns with that bank account, and then the transactions come into play from there. All right, so what other categories might we have under assets? I mean, you might have something like investments, where you have accounts with that. I'm going to just leave this at checking and savings right now for demonstration purposes today. We're just going to talk about cash. When I go to save, it says two new categories, 2 new accounts. Now, this second category doesn't matter really. It's a folder that's empty. So you'll see it listed, but it's not going to be able to have any transactions to it because transactions only occur at the account level. Now, liabilities. Liabilities is the money you owe. I think a good example for this food pantry would be a credit card. And we'll just call it credit card right now rather than putting a brand name on it. And we'll say the initial balance of the liability, it's a positive number. Let's say you've got, $2,000 that you owe. That's where you go look up your credit card online. As of this date, you owe this much. Any transaction that occurs after that gets entered in. All right, we'll go ahead and save that. We don't even have to put a category because we're going pretty simple. All right, now income. Now this is, maybe I shouldn't have done just food pantry, but this will work. Let's say we've got a category, the church members, and so we'll say offerings. We'll say restricted fund, meaning offerings that came into the church for the restricted fund food pantry. That's one category. So we'll now create an account that's called offerings from church. Leave it at that. We're not going to actually have an initial balance here. We're starting as of January 1, we'll say, beginning of the month. Beginning of the month is always a good time to start. Put in 0 and save that. Now, next we'll add a category for grant income. Grant income. So if we do have a grant income, you could have that all go into one account. But maybe you want to track specific grants because they disperse the dollars at different times, and you want to track that to make sure that you're getting what you were told you were going to get and be able to balance it a little bit easier. So sometimes grants are from, named after something. So the Smith Fund. The Smith family was a wonderful family that loved the food bank and set it up so that into an endowment. Let's even call that Smith Endowment, where it gives X amount every month. We'll look at that. And right now, at the beginning of the year, that is at 0. And then maybe you have an organization where you can apply for a grant. Yeah, endowment's not quite the same as a grant, but we get the idea. And we'll call this the XYZ organization. Start initial balance at 0. And so you start to see now we've got 3 different sources of income that we track separately. They roll up by category and they roll up total to income. All right, we'll save that. Very good, confirm. And now we've got expenses. And so we might have something like probably food expenses. Yes, we'll get donations, but certainly you're gonna have food expenses. And you'll probably also have cleaning expenses. This is my experience at the food pantry. Our local food pantry, which is right across the street, takes volunteers of all sorts of kinds. And me and my family have just happened to be on the cleaning team many times. And yeah, there's a lot of supplies. So we'll put a new account. Let's see, we'll just call it local grocery. And that's the expenses. So sometimes in order to fill the shelves of specific items, you got to go to local grocery. And then we'll do another one for wholesaler. Sometimes you can take advantage of buying in bulk. We'll do that, and then cleaning expenses. So we can say supplies. And then let's do deep clean company. So sometimes we need somebody who really does a good job to clean everything. So there you go. Off the top of my head, I think that makes good sense. I'm sure there's plenty of other kinds of accounts we can do. All right, so our chart of accounts has been updated. And let's take a look at some reports first. So we have here general ledger, income and expense, chart of accounts, and balance sheet. So your general ledger will have nothing right now because we've done no transaction. Your income and expense report doesn't have any data yet, but that's really what we're tracking. You see, we're going to put in a budget for each of these income and expense accounts, and then we're going to do actual transaction or fake transactions that'll look actual here. Now, a chart of accounts report shows your beginning and ending balances for a set time. And so you have your assets and your liabilities, and you can see our beginning balances are here already. They're the same as our ending balances because we haven't done anything. Now, this is a good place to show, well, what's that time frame, the beginning and end? Throughout Church360 Ledger, you're going to see this time selector. And when you click on it, it'll tell you the start date and the end date. And this is applied for that view, and it'll stay the same until you change it. And so right now, the full year 2022 will have the same transactions as Q1, which is the first 3 months, or January, which is the first month, because we haven't gotten too far. So the transactions will always stay the same. Now, maybe, I don't know why, but maybe you're doing, a half-month report. Well, depending on where it comes in, we might be able to show how the numbers change, but that's pretty straightforward. I don't think you're going to have any trouble figuring that out as we go. You can collapse these if you want to print a summary more than the details. All of this is meant to be pretty straightforward. You know what you're getting because what you're getting is what you see. Let's go ahead and add some budgets. Oh, wait, did I have any other? Balance sheet. I didn't show balance sheet. Balance sheet shows your assets minus your liabilities. And so this shows that we've got $221,000 in the bank and we owe $21.57 on our credit card, which will pay off at the end of the month. But our assets minus liabilities is $219,334. Going under settings is where you'll find budgets. And budgets are a way to estimate what you're going to do this year. You're going to estimate your money coming in and you're going to estimate your money going out. You only budget income and expense because your assets and liabilities are just a reflection of where the actual dollars are coming. And sure, you could budget your balance at the end of the month, but that seems silly. I don't know why you would do that. You really want to balance what you expect to come in and what you expect to go out. All right, so offerings from church. Maybe you're basing this off of your experience and you say, typically we get about $25,000 every year. It's not everything we use, but it's a good number. And so maybe you get it evenly throughout the year and you say 25, 1, 2, 3. When you type that into the total, it'll automatically disperse that throughout the year. Let me zoom out a little bit so we see the whole year. So you can see all the way to December, January to December. Now, that's one way of doing that. You can do that to start and then say, okay, December, we always get a little bit more. So I'm going to put 500 there. And June is a slow month. 5,000. We only get 500 in June. And you can start tweaking this. And if you start tweaking it, it'll change your total. But if you type in the total here again, it'll evenly disperse it throughout the year. So let's say like Smith Endowment has been set up that every month they give $2,000. So you just type in 24,000 here and you get 2,000 from them. And then XYZ organization, they give a lot, but they do it on a grant once a year. And you're going to apply for that in March and you're expecting you're going to get it in June. And that's a $50,000 grant. So we're going to put that there at one time. So your total is 50,000, but it's only coming in 1 month. Now, the local grocery store, depending on the month, you could have more or less dollars. It could be a month where, you didn't get any milk from anyone, and so you got to go buy milk. But, it's going to vary from month to month. Now, you could base it off of last year's activity if you have that data. And the way you would do that would be with this previous year actual. There's just a button, you click it, and it'll fill it in for you. We don't have that data, so we can't use that. The other option is previous year budget. Like maybe your budget last year was good. There's some things that caused it to be off, so you don't want to use the actuals, but the budget is pretty typical. You just put that in there. So you can use those once you have data. So next time around, you're going to have more options available for you. All right, local grocery, we're going to just say, all right, I know that January is always a busy month. Colder months are busier. So we spend about 600, we'll do 500, kind of 400. And then starting in the spring, it's about 200 a month. People aren't using the food pantry as much during the summer. But that means we don't have to go as much. And then you can kind of ramp it up as the year goes on. Now, you probably can't tell this, but I'm just using my hands on the keyboard, not using the mouse. We make this so that you can tab through it, and then you go to the next one. You can actually tab through the whole thing if you want. Just depends on how you want to do it. Now, wholesaler, you may say, we have a deal with them where we get the same quantity of items every month, and they give us a really good deal. And that is, let's say, $200 a month, something like that. That seems a little bit low, but remember, we're donation based, and donation of food and gifts, that is not cash. Remember, this is cash basis accounting, so you're not tracking that as gifts. Those are gifts in kind, not actual cash. All right, so, and actually those would go under income anyways, not expenses. All right, supplies. So supplies, you might say, all right, well, by the end of the year, I'm gonna spend $600. I don't know where it's gonna come in from, but I'm just gonna spread it out evenly. Whereas the deep clean company, that is actually a quarterly bill for $250. And you can go type it in that way. And so that way you have some variety in your budget that might reflect reality. Your income that's budgeted is $100,000. Your expenses, your expenses, is $10,550. So your net revenue is $89,000. That's probably, that's not a good nonprofit example. Let's say our wholesaler was quite a bit more than that. Let's say our wholesaler was $85,000. We buy a lot of food. That puts us a little bit closer to break even at the bottom. I didn't think that through. All right, these are all just play numbers for right now though, and there's other expenses that we haven't tracked. So I'm gonna go ahead and click Save. And now my budgets are in place. So when I go to my income and expense report, you'll see my budget for January is listed there. Now, I should point out one thing. With the income and expense report, because budgets are by month, you can't actually go by the half of the month or anything like that. You only have the months for the year. They have to be tied into the budget. So the date selector will change, as you can see here. You just get months, not dates. All right. Let's see here. Dean just posted a question. For donations, I found it more accurate to budget by number of Sundays in each month. Thus, 5 Sunday months would have been budgeted in donations, budget donations than 4 Sunday months. Absolutely, Dean. We do that at my church as well. Now, we don't have that where you put in number of Sundays here, but that's a good way of doing it, especially because there's seasonality. And so you are going to look month to month. And I know at my church, we always look and say, okay, which are the 5 Sunday months? And the ones that are really hard are the ones where it's split out. Although because it's cash basis, we usually do the deposits on Monday. And so we look at it how many Mondays per month. But thanks for pointing that out. That's a good thing to think about. And once you've done budgets once, you tend to think, oh, what did I miss when I looked at the income and expense report? Where was I off on my budget? And that's why. All right, let's look at transactions because I'm talking a lot. Transactions are what fills out and begins to account for things. That's what will show up on your main screen. If you click the orange button, you always go to the main screen. You can see our first things that are showing up are your initial balance. That transaction shows up. And when you click on it, you can see that it's tied to equity. Equity is under the hood, but that's what accounts for that savings. So I'm not going to get into the details of that other than I wanted to show that it appears. So everything you do is tracked. We always show that. In fact, if you go here to reports and go to event log, you can see all the things that I have been doing. Even those transactions, the created a new account, created a new transaction. That's what I just clicked on. We have those 3 transactions here, and I can always go and see not only the details of it, but who it was that did it and when. You can also filter by these. So we are tracking everything. So nobody can do something in here without it being logged. All right, let's go through transactions. I'll pull up my fun slide here. Credits and debits. If you are not a financial person, it's hard to remember what to do when. So with an asset, you debit the asset, you have a deposit, you debit the asset account, and then you credit the income account because you want everything to be balanced and they have to go on each side of the transaction, right? Easy enough. If you're not a financial person, it's not that easy. So let's go back here to Ledger and we'll look at transactions. When you click New Transaction, you get 5 options there. We're going to go the most complicated first, journal entry. So let's say that we are depositing our gift, a weekly donation. And I already forgot what I said that was going to be from a amount. But we can just say here, weekly offerings from restricted fund. So the account, we would deposit that into checking. That's where we make our deposits. And we are, remember, increasing the asset through a debit. So I'm doing debit here, and let's say that was $2,000. So then I want to increase my income. Oops, income, offerings from church. There we go. I have to remember, increase income is credit. So I'm going to do it over here under credit. And now I have a balanced transaction. You see, even while I'm still typing, if I have 2,000 on this side and 200 on this side, it's not balanced. It will not let me process it. That's the red. But if I go ahead and make it balanced, then I can process it. Now you might have other things coming in. So maybe you have that Smith endowment, which again, I forgot exactly how much we said. Maybe that's $500 here, 25. You can have it be different number of lines, but they always have to balance. Now, again, accountants know this, off the top of their head. But if you're a volunteer who's never done any kind of accounting before, this is a little complicated. Well, let me show you what these transaction paths do. Let's go over here to do a deposit. I'm just changing this to deposit. It gives you this path. It says, all right, you're making a deposit. That means that you need an asset account and an income account because that's what a deposit is. So when I click on asset, I only get 2 options, checking and savings. That's it. I'll click on checking. And I know I have $2,500 in cash and checks in my hand, so I'll put in $2,500. And then we say, well, where's it coming from? Well, it has to be coming from an income account, and we have 3 income account options. You notice it's only the accounts, it's not the categories, although the categories do show up above hand to tell you where that account sits. Well, we've got offerings and we got the Smith endowment. And the offerings are $2,000 and the Smith endowment is $500. You'll notice even before I'm done typing, it tells me how much is left for this to be balanced. So I put 2,000 here, I've got 500 unaccounted for. I'm going to go ahead and type in 500. And now I've got a balanced transaction. You see, we're not doing anything other than journal entries. but we're making the entry for the journal entry intuitive. We're making it so that you don't make a mistake, or at least as much as we can to prevent mistakes. If you do a typo, well, we can't help you there, but at least you're not picking the wrong accounts. I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, now that I saved, you start to see some money here. You see my asset has increased and my income has increased. I can navigate through here to see exactly where it's coming from. And as I navigate, I get my little cookie crumbs up at the top that tell me where I've been, where I'm going in my chart of accounts. Speaking of chart of accounts, we now have some things to put in what we call the Omnibar up here. In this white bar, if I clear it out, you get easy navigation to your chart of accounts in the order of your chart of accounts. Now, it doesn't have that tree indentation, but it's certainly done in the exact same order as your chart of accounts. So if you need to go and say, what has Smith Endowment given us this year, you can go in there, or you can just start typing Smith there, and you navigate to that account. So we make it really easy to figure out what's going on. Now let's go up to new transaction. Let's do a payment. So you had to go and get some additional milk for the week. Milk for the week to fill the shelves. You can put whatever you want in that memo field. There's a character limit, but yeah, you can type in what you need for the most part. All right, payee. Well, where's that coming from? So let's say it's DEF grocery. Maybe depending on the week, you go to different groceries, and so you don't need to say who it's coming from in your chart of accounts, but you do need to say so in your payee for records. So you're taking that out of your checking. This time we've spent $60 on milk, which is what, 3 gallons these days? No, not that bad. And we go down here, it's coming from the local grocery account. See, that's what's going on. Now, maybe while you're there, you say, actually, I need to get some cleaning supplies. So I'm going to do 65 and do cleaning supplies for $5. Now, look at this. Even though I put everything in kind of similar spots, because I had different accounts, it changes the labels on there. So like this is an asset, but now this is an expense. And because this is an expense, it's a payment, by default, anything that's an asset is getting credited. Remember, from our handy dandy chart of accounts helper, if you're going to decrease what's in an asset, you're going to credit that asset. So that's what we have right here. And of course, if you're going to increase expenses, you're going to debit them. Balance transaction once again. Let's say that instead of my checking account, I put this on our credit card, the food pantry credit card. Well, that's a liability, but it's still a credit. But because it's a liability, we're increasing it. You see, going back here, it's the same thing. I would either decrease an asset or increase a liability, but it's the same kind of thing because it balances off my increase in expense, which would be a debit. All right, so I'm going to do that and click Save. And so now I've used a credit card bill. And so when I go to liabilities, and I look at my credit card, while I used to be at 2157, now I'm at 2222. That's how that works. My liability is increased. Now let's say I'm on a kind of old system. I get my credit card bill in the mail and I need to pay it off. So I'm going to go up here to New Transaction and I pay it off with my checkbook. So you go here to New Transaction, check. Well, a check is nothing more than a payment, except it prints a check. Now, you may handwrite your checks, but I know many organizations buy pre-printed checks, security checks, that they feed through their printer and have it print out. That's what we recommend with checks because the security on those is so much greater. So let's say this is our January credit card bill. And so the payee is whatever our credit card company is. Let's say Vistacard, something like that. There you go. So this, we are paying out of our checking. That's an asset. And we are going to reduce our liability because we're paying it off. So we go down here and put our liability there. And so we're going to pay it in full because that is what a good steward does. And we're paying our credit card bill off, all $22 of that. And then we're going to put a check number on it. So the check number would be either what's next in your checking account, like in your checkbook, or whatever check you're going to feed into that. We're going to leave it blank for right now, just to show how this works. Oops, blank, accidentally hit one. All right, so this is my check. It gives you a little mock-up of what it's going to say, and you click Save. The check was added to your print queue. Well, that is right up here. You see that little label with the 1? If we click Print, that's the print queue. Now, if you're going to print it out of your printer, you would go click on this and click Print. And it shows you what it looks like. We work with a partner that will sell you security checks that match this perfectly, and they guarantee it. Otherwise, you can buy checks from the store, and most of them will match. You have to double check which one you're doing. This one would be a top check, a third of the paper. It should match, but it's not a guarantee. You'll want to test it out a little bit. But if you go here, you can see what it's going to look like. You actually get, usually those are divided in thirds, and so you might include one with the check and keep one for yourself. When I go to hit print, it's going a little bit slow. Why is that going on? Let me go back here to my print queue. Go here, print. I'll have to figure out what's going on. It actually might be showing up on a different screen. That's okay. When you go to hit print, it'll pull up your default printer. And I don't actually have a default printer these days, so that may be my issue. But it'll let you print out and it'll do a full print preview. But actually, I'm going to go back here and say, no, I'm going to write it in my checkbook, tear it out, mail it in. And so I'll just mark this as printed. And oh, yeah, see that the mold. I wonder if it's because I'm gonna have to figure out what's going on with that. It's been a little while since I've done that, but the mold's not popping up like I planned. Anyways, that would mark it as printed and clear it from the list. All right, so regardless of actually printing that, yeah, it still says unprinted, that transaction is done because that's the day I'm sending the money away. So now my liabilities are down to 0. Of course, my assets are down a little bit. I've had income and I've had expenses, and we've gone through all of these different payment types other than transfer, although transfer is pretty easy. Let's say I'm going from checking, I'm going to move $2,000 to savings, and we'll just do, transfer to savings is my memo. We'll click save. There you go. So it doesn't change my assets at all. It doesn't change my income, expense, or liability because I'm just moving from asset to asset. But I wanted to show you, we've got every one of those transactions here now. So if we go back to our reports and we go to our income and expense report, we can see here where we're at January 22 compared to January 22 budget. So budget versus actual. What were we expecting? Well, the month's not over yet. But you can say, well, we're at 61% of our budget. We're almost there with what we expected from offerings. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that 96% grant income. We are expecting a little more than 500. I'm not sure what's going on there, but we should check it out. Expenses are roughly well under what we are expecting. We haven't gone to the grocery as much. We haven't bought our wholesaler yet. There's other transactions to put in there. And then you can see your expenses for cleaning there. And again, you can collapse this, do summaries, whatever you need to do to print out and report, but it's all right there. All right, we are just about out of time, and I'm eager to get to your questions, but I want to show you one other thing first. If you go up here to settings and you go to users, this is where you can add other people to come into play with finances. I find finances fun. This is where you can add other users. And when you click add a new user, it asks you about a role. So you just need an email address and assign a role. Under roles, you can add different security permissions. So if I wanted to say, volunteer, grocery volunteer, someone who, maybe you have a volunteer who manages the grocery bills, and you say you want them to be able to, this food applies to the food pantry. You don't want them to manage the chart of accounts or any of these other things, but you are going to want them to see certain accounts. We'll click submit to save it. Oops, I've chosen no permissions. Can view. We'll click submit. Grocery volunteer, cleared that out. When I go in here now, I can select the different accounts. And we'll just say my local grocery account. There we go. That's good. Okay, one selected account. And that's for the food pantry. Save. Good. Now the food pantry volunteer can see a subset of accounts. So if I invite somebody for that, the only account they're going to be able to see is this view right here, so they can see as much as they need. Now, I only have one line on there. There's actually, let's go ahead and do one other real quick. We're just going to do a credit card payment, credit card to the local grocery. You see these things are being saved as I enter them. I'm going to do another $50 for local grocery. And there we go. Still not enough line items to get a graph for me. We'll do one other one. Local grocery, credit card, $150, grocery. Yeah, I forget exactly how many I have to show for it. At a certain point, yeah, you'll get an actual line with your budget on there. But I was thinking I just needed 2 points, but I think there's a little bit more. Maybe because, actually that's probably what it is. It's because I have only one day. There we go. Now, actually I'm almost out of time. I'll show you that though, because it's pretty cool. So I had to have 2 days. It's not 2 line items, it's 2 different days. This one over here is 126, and then as we go. So there's the different balance. What I did here is I changed that date, but let's say I want to change the amount. Let's say this one was actually supposed to be $500. I click on it, I edit it, I save it, everything's changed. I've edited the transaction. You might think, especially if you think this way, like looking out for places people can embezzle funds, like that's an easy way to embezzle money. You say it's one thing and then you change it after the report's done. Look, over here, you've got this little icon that says this account has been, or this transaction has been edited. What we've done in the background is create a separate journal entry, changing it from 50 to 500. It's this $400 journal entry, and that shows up in the event log. You see this here. I just created a new transaction, this one here, for $450, a revision of this transaction. Again, like I said before, everything you do is tracked so that you can't be dishonest without somebody being able to find out. That goes right back to one of our goals before. All right, I could talk about this all day. I'm already over time. Let me go ahead and go back to my PowerPoint and show you a couple of things. Training resources. We have training webinars available on our website, 360ledger.com/training. We have a product update blog where you can go and see anything new that's been added. We have a resource center where all sorts of help articles have been, help videos have been put into place. As a reminder, start your 37-day free trial at 360 Ledger. Now, I'll talk about support in just a moment, but we have our pricing on our website, and this is a very quick summary of that. If you purchase Church360 Ledger by itself, nothing else, you can get it for $40 a month or $400 a year. So you basically save 2 months. There is a $199 startup fee for your first year only. If you already have something like Church360 members, you can get it for $30 a year, or $30 a month, or $300 if you pay annually. And if you have both members and Unite, it drops down to $20 a month, $200 annually. I mean, when you think about what that works out a week and the time savings you'll have by giving your volunteer a tool like this that's easy to use, My goodness, that's reasonable. Now, all of them do have that $199 startup fee, but included in that is work with a personalized onboarding specialist who will help you get up and running. They're not going to do the chart of accounts for you, but they'll coach you through it. And then you also, on all of our plans, get software support. And software support includes our online help center, which has detailed articles written out for you, shows you how to use the software, and you can access this at any time with this little I button down below. You can email our support team. Oops, let's try that again. There you go. Email our support team at support@cts.cph.org. You can also call them, speak with a live person. If you call them and you need them to kind of walk you through something, they have the tools to get your permission to log into your computer, and they'll walk you through it. It's pretty cool. All right, I am right at 2 o'clock, but I got time for a few questions. I'm always happy to stick around. So a few groundkeeping or housekeeping rules with Q&A. Type your questions into the chat. Remember, a recording will be emailed soon. And if you are watching the recording, you can't ask any questions live, but you can email them to our support team. So I know we've got a few that have come across here. Let's see. Dean says, in all the sessions I have seen so far, I've never heard anyone talk about plate donations. Those are monies just dropped into the plate with no knowledge of who gave the monies. How would these be handled in Church360 entries to the donation entries each Sunday? Well, Dean, that is actually a Church360 members question. And you're right, I did a webinar last week and I didn't touch on that. Offerings are entered in Church360 members, and if you don't pick a person on the offering entry screen, it goes into loose offerings, as we call it. I think you can also type in loose offerings to get it to that point. On the ledger side of things, it doesn't matter. It's money that's going into the bank, and so that would be included in your total. So that's really a question for our other software, which I don't have pulled up and ready to go. But that's where it is. And it's pretty straightforward. Loose offerings is the term. There should be a help article on it. And if not, we probably should add one. But that's what we call it, is that you'd just be loose offerings. So it's dollars that are given that are not assigned to a person. And yeah, you get them a lot. In fact, it's so common, that's why it's kind of out of my mind, because I often think of the exceptions and show how we handle the exceptions. But that's like a every week kind of occurrence. So thanks for bringing that up. And when I lead webinars in the future, if I lead any more before Vickers, I'll make sure to share that in there as well. All right, next up. Can a user be able to be set up to review or audit all accounts? That user would not be able to make any transactions or change any entries. Yes, that is one of the options that you can do with our roles. So if you go in here, we'll close this, add a new role called Auditor. Role applies to, you could say, all of the books. They cannot manage, but they can view all accounts. That's all you do. And then you click Submit. Can see all accounts, but cannot do transactions. So that's simple. Then you assign that user that role, and they'll be able to log in and see everything, but not touch anything, not change it. Good. When you decide to issue a manual check, sometimes the manual check will not agree with the original check. How do you handle this in the bank reconciliation? That's a little bit more detailed than I can answer in the Q&A. When you say a manual check, it will not agree with the original check. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the original check. A manual check, in my mind, is something that you handwrite as opposed to print out of the system. And so unless you'd like to provide more details, Dean, I'm going to make the assumption that that's what you mean, that somebody's handwriting a check and maybe it doesn't have the right numbers on it, but you can enter in the number. So it does not require it to be sequential. It'll suggest the next number that needs to be printed, but you can override that. And so you might have the stack of paper checks that you would print and then a checkbook that is a manual. And if that's what you're asking for, that they're different numbers, you don't have to worry about it because you put the right number of the check in there and that'll show up in reconciliation. So that's what I think you mean. If you don't, you can put something else into the question and answer and try to clarify. All right. We currently use checks from Intuit. I assume we can't use those on this program. Craig, I can't say for sure. because I'm not familiar with which Intuit checks they have. But I can say that we offer two options within our general settings where you can have a top style check or a middle style check. And you can also choose to have one or two signatures. What I would suggest, because there's plenty of different checks out there, and that's why we work with a partner, Forms Plus. They just rebranded recently, and I don't remember what it is, but they still say a Forms Plus company. Our team, when you sign up, we can help you get checks from there. They guarantee the checks work because there's so many different check options here, and we just can't possibly guarantee all of them because you never know. And building in the tools to like align properly is complicated. And so we say, we got an option for you. They're competitively priced. They're very secure. But you can try one of these, maybe print it out on a piece of paper first and then hold it up to the light and align it. That's how we make sure it works with our Forms Plus checks. And if something happens, sometimes browsers change things. We've had that happen once a while ago where the browser changed things and things got off by some pixels. We had to go in and readjust it. But that's what we guarantee, is that we always readjust to match the checks from our partner. So I can't say for sure, but I'd say give it a try. You've got two options, top and middle. If they're a bottom check, well, then that's not going to work. That's just not what we offer. All right. I think that's all the questions. And yeah, thanks for saying thank you, Craig. Well, we are over time and out of questions, so I'm going to go wrap up for the day. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's always so much fun to present on our products. As you can tell, I love doing these webinars. I'm passionate about the ministry and the mission of the church. That's why I'm going into it. And I see these tools as a way to further the mission by providing ways to do the business side of the church easier, more efficiently. It has to be done. It's good stewardship of our time and good use of vocations for our volunteers in the church. And it's not always the most exciting, but it's crucial to the mission. So that's why we do what we do here at Concordia Technology Solutions. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great rest of the day.